Excellencies, colleagues and friends, hello everyone and welcome and thank you so much for joining us for today at this important side event, Accountability for Gender-Based Crimes and Rights Violations in Afghanistan. This side event is sponsored by MADRE Inc. MADRE is an international feminist fund and human rights organization based in New York. On behalf of MADRE and our co-sponsors, including Gender Persecution in Afghanistan Accountability Working Group, Hamrah Initiative, the Afghanistan LGBTIQ Organization, ALO, the Human Rights and Gender Justice Clinic at CUNY School of Law, Human Rights Watch, Rahyab Initiative, Empowerment for Her, and Zaman Shuja Organization, it is my honor to moderate today's session. Since the Taliban's return to power in August 2021, Afghanistan has witnessed a systematic rollback of human rights with women and girls and LGBTIQ individuals especially targeted. The Taliban denies women, girls from their fundamental rights, including to education, work, freedom of movement, expression, assembly, and participation in public life. Its leadership makes clear they don't believe LGBTIQ people have the rights to exist in Afghanistan. They have dismantled protections for gender violence victims. Women, girls, and LGBTIQ people and people with disabilities or other intersecting identities face compounded harms in Afghanistan under the Taliban rule. The Taliban enforced discriminatory rights deprivations through alleged arbitrary detention, killings, sexual violence, and other torture. UN experts have identified these systematic rights violations as the crime against humanity of gender persecution and have called for the codification of gender apartheid as well. ICC prosecutors requested arrest warrants for Taliban leaders, citing crimes including gender persecution against women, girls, and LGBTIQ individuals. In today's session, we will discuss the accountability for gender-based crimes and rights violations in Afghanistan. Now, let me briefly introduce our distinguished panelists. We have Mr. Richard Bennett, the UN Special Rapporteur on Afghanistan. Mr. Bennett has served in Afghanistan on several occasions in different capacities, including as the Chief of the Human Rights Service with the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, or UNAMA. We have also Farishta Abbasi. Farishta is the Afghanistan researcher in Asia Division of Human Rights Watch, focusing on research and documentation of ongoing abuses in Afghanistan. We also have Fatima Ahmadi. She's working with Rawadari. At Rawadari, she leads an accountability initiative focused on the potential case before the International Court of Justice regarding the violation of CEDAW Convention. And she's also a research fellow with the RWI. And our last panelist is Dr. Banafsha Yaqubi. She's the head of the Rahyab initiative that works on behalf of people with disabilities in Afghanistan, and which is also one of the 10 civil society organizations that are member of Hamrah, an initiative set up in 2024 to support civil society organizations in exile, mainly women-led, and all working with and on behalf of marginalized groups inside Afghanistan. Thank you so much, our panelists, for joining us today, and thank you so much for your amazing work. So to open our discussions, I will pose a few guiding questions to each panelist, and each speaker will have 7 minutes to respond, and then we will open the floor for Q&A. But before we begin, I have a quick note on logistics. Recording videos or taking pictures is not allowed, but my colleagues are here and they will take pictures and videos, and then we will share it afterwards through our official platforms. Thank you so much for your understanding. So my first question is for Dr. Yaqubi. Dr. Yaqubi, you lead an organization that works on behalf of people with disabilities in Afghanistan, but the Rahyab initiative is also a member of Hamrah that supports civil society organizations in exile to continue their work in Afghanistan. Can you first tell us something about the role of civil society organizations in providing protection and justice in Afghanistan? And second, could you share your experience of impact of Taliban rule on women and girls with disability and other intersecting identities in Afghanistan? And what challenges do they face in accessing protection or services? And what action by states and international entities like UNAMA would help ensure crimes and rights violations against them are documented and addressed? Over to you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. So you all be witness because he asked me 4 questions. Integrated them in a question. So thanks for joining us, and thank you for being with us, and special thanks for listening to me. So it's being a first person who's speaking, it's a bit easy and difficult. Regarding the civil societies organization impact and affect specifically in a society like Afghanistan, which is really complicated society. Friends who are from Afghanistan and friends who work inside Afghanistan, you all know the complication of situation inside our country. Even if we go back to the democratic governance and democratic government, which we had relatively till 2021, so one of the, very strong and powerful arms of even the Republic government of Afghanistan was civic society and the civil society stakeholders. In one part, in one point, if we take it very positive, and from another side, this civic society was some people who always sound like a community who always said to government, "Oh, hey, we are watching you. We know what are you doing? What is this?" Kind of civic society in Afghanistan had a bit of like monitoring situation as well, status as well. And beside that, if we go to service delivery and supporting specifically the vulnerable group, including women and girls who are suffering most of them from double discrimination and they have intersective identities. So based on a research which I'll have to speak regarding my research, sorry. And if any of you would be interested, I will provide the link of my paper, then you can go and read it. So most of the services which went to Afghanistan, most of them, I'm not going to say all of them, but these were the civic society organization and the national organization and the grassroots local organization who worked inside the country and with the help of international society and international organizations. So if we go to people with disability, trying to say even the government, they just supported people with disability based on the law and rule and kind of legal framework. They said, yeah, it's allowed for you to go to education, allowed for you to go to work, this and that. But most of the support, financial support and the materials and all support came from the other organizations and other like national and international organizations. But if we go to other women with intersective identity, like in the women, unfortunately, we have had lots of issues and problems. People who are at the rural areas, specifically women and girls, still we've got lots of issues and problems, specifically since they are more traditional. And then again, these civic society organization tried to raise awareness among people, so relatively were successful. And then if we go to LGBTQI community, unfortunately, situation for them has been dire and it's more dire nowadays. But nowadays, civic society, the organization who are in exile, like Hamra collaboration, so we are trying to do our best to deliver our services inside the country, and we are trying to advocate internationally although we are out of the country, but still we are connected with our people inside the country, and we are trying to do our advocacy and our raising awareness. So saying that, I'm trying to say if there is any peace process or peace building, peacemaking programs, and if there is any decision-making opportunity for Afghanistan and for people of Afghanistan, so we shouldn't forget these vulnerable group representatives, which are this civic society inside or outside the country. But the main challenge which we are facing nowadays is that the organization who are working inside the country, we have just two ways. One, we have to work with the de facto government, which I think you all know. I'm not going to go to any detail because you are aware of the situation inside the country. So the organization who are specifically working regarding human rights, women's rights, vulnerable people rights, it's not easy to establish their organization inside the country and continue their work based on the Taliban ideology. Or we have to work somehow. If you're going to go inside the country, we have to work on the ground, which is it has lots of challenges and issues as well. So do I have time for the competition?
Yes, we have
later.
one more.
So I will leave it for at the end. I'll go to my recommendation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yacoubi. So my next question is for Frishta. Frishta Jan, Human Rights Watch has documented systematic abuses by the Taliban. My question for you is that what patterns of violations against women and LGBTIQ individuals that point specifically to the crime against humanity of gender persecution, and what concrete steps can state or international mechanisms take now to support meaningful accountability for gender-based crimes in Afghanistan? Thank you, Frishta.
Thank you so much, Artemis. So, I mean, as you mentioned, that Human Rights Watch reported in September 2023 about the crimes against humanity of gender persecution in Afghanistan. I mean, at the time, our findings and the witness statements that we had collected with women in Afghanistan lead us to analyze that what is happening in Afghanistan. We believe that it may be the Taliban the Taliban were allegedly committing the crimes against humanity of gender persecution, which, I mean, earlier this year the International Criminal Court issued requested applications of arrest warrant for the Taliban leaders based on that. I mean, what is in the past three and a half, nearly 4 years, we have been documenting what is happening in Afghanistan, and we have monitored the situation very closely. With that, I also want to say that it is becoming very difficult, extremely difficult to document rights violations in Afghanistan because the Taliban are actively blocking any sort of access to information in the country. So it is extremely getting difficult to access information in Afghanistan. There is no independent local media in the country, so that makes it difficult for organizations, other organizations to document these abuses. But regardless of that, Human Rights Watch have published reports, and they have been very active on ensuring that we are capturing what is happening in Afghanistan. But I also want to say that what we hear from the country is just the tip of the iceberg. We don't really know the extent of the repression, because in most of the cases, victims and survivors on the ground, they prefer not to talk to anyone because they're being advised by the Taliban not to talk to anyone because they fear their own safety. What could be, I mean, the gender crimes, as you mentioned. I mean, we always speak about Afghanistan as being one of the worst human rights crises, I mean, especially for women and girls. But the situation of the LGBTQI+ community in Afghanistan, they have always been a very vulnerable community in the country. Even under the former government, they did not have legal protection. There was no sort of protection for this community in Afghanistan. They have always been under persecution in the country, and they've always lived a very difficult life. And that's why in a few of our reports that Human Rights Watch done, we have many times expressed this call that we don't believe that Afghanistan is a safe country for LGBTQI+ community, and we have called on the states, the international community, specifically the EU, the UK and the US, to ensure that they are opening pathways to resettle these at-risk individuals in the country, because we don't think that they're safe. The recent report that we published was in March this year about the deportations from Pakistan, the pushbacks from Pakistan, and through that we were able to document that members of LGBTQI+ community who are going back to Afghanistan, they can no longer have a normal life. I mean, which is the case for many of Afghans. In that report, Human Rights Watch actually called on not only Pakistan to stop deportation, but also called on the other states to ensure that nobody is deporting any Afghan to Afghanistan, because Afghanistan is not a safe country for anybody at this point. What could we do for all these abuses and crimes that is happening, which includes the arbitrary detention, torture, cases of extrajudicial killings against women, former security officers, government employees, members of the LGBTQI+ community, journalists, human rights defenders in Afghanistan. I think there is, I know that the Special Rapporteur will pick up on this. He's he has, I'm using the phrase that he's been using about the all tools approach. I believe that we need to be using all the tools that we have in the toolbox. So currently there is an ongoing ICC investigation. States needs to support that. There was a development that was announced earlier this year. There was a CEDAW initiative, an initiative by 4 states, Germany, Canada, Netherlands, and Australia, to hold the Taliban accountable because of their violations based on the Convention on Elimination of Any Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which could lead to a potential case at the International Court of Justice, which Fatima John may speak more about it later. There is a call from the Afghan civil society, women's rights defenders, for the codification of gender apartheid under the as a crimes against humanity. So these are the possible avenues, but what I want to emphasize a little bit more on the gap, because for each of these accountability mechanisms that we spoke to, there is a huge need for documentation. You need to have evidence to be able to prove any of these abuses, any of these crimes, and we don't have that right now. Unfortunately, Afghanistan lacks an independent, comprehensive investigative mechanism who can document the extent of repression in Afghanistan and collect and preserve evidence, identify perpetrators, and to be able to cooperate with criminal proceeding, including international courts as well as national courts, which would be the cases of universal jurisdiction. And I think that is very important. And this is a call led by the Afghan civil society, calling on the UN Human Rights Council to establish this mechanism in complementary to the Special Rapporteur's vital work. And I want to emphasize that this will be a distinct mandate, but very much complementary to the work of the Special Rapporteur, who has been a huge support for the civil society. So that's where the gap stands. If we want to address the gender crimes in Afghanistan, I think because we are sitting at the building of the UN Human Rights Council, it is the place to begin this, and it's the place to address the gap of documentation in Afghanistan. So the UN Human Rights Council should immediately establish this mechanism for the country, because the physical evidence may go away, and at the same time, in similar situations like Syria, Iran, Belarus, this council has mandated a similar mechanism. So we believe that all the thresholds for establishing this mechanism in Afghanistan have been met. And again, I said this in the earlier panel as well. I know I'm repeating myself, but this is what I think, that establishing a comprehensive accountability mechanism for Afghanistan is the minimum of what the states can do for Afghanistan. That's what Afghan women deserves. Victims everywhere in the world deserve justice. Afghans deserve the same justice. And for that, we need to have this mechanism to ensure that we are documenting what is happening in Afghanistan, and we are holding those who are responsible for these abuses accountable.
Thank you so much, Farishta John. Also, I want to remind that last year, it was in June that more than 100, I think it was around 100 civil society organizations that they signed an open letter, and they asked the member states to establish this mechanism. I hope the member states can take this into their consideration. My next question is for Fatima Ahmadi. Fatima John, in view of your work in supporting the potential case before the International Court of Justice for gender-based crimes under the Taliban, Afghanistan's failure to uphold its CEDAW obligations under the rule, could you tell us more about this process, its current status, and what can be done to support it? And could you also add anything to Farishta's remark about the patterns of violations against women, girls, and LGBTIQ people that makes this process so necessary? Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much for the organizers, the organization, and others who put this panel together, and all the people who are spending their time here to listening for the accountability for Afghans in Afghanistan. Well, I think Farishta already mentioned a lot, and also Dr. Yacoubi, about the situation in Afghanistan, how this is very dire for women and girls in Afghanistan. Specifically, after 4 years, our girls lost 4 years of school. That's, it's unbelievable in 2025. The country doesn't allow the girls go to school. The situation in Afghanistan is making international actors, lawyers, and also the civil society of Afghanistan to push for accountability like the CEDAW, because the state, the country, the Taliban as a de facto right now, they systematically and widespread two important elements. They targeting women and girls' rights in Afghanistan. in a different area, like the education, health sector, public and private life and civic life. Just imagining the Mahram policy limiting women from accessing to so many of their rights. The free of movements, they cannot go beyond the 72 kilometers or 45 miles. These two simple elements restricting women to access to their rights gravely and greatly. For example, and why we are actually looking for accountability outside of Afghanistan. The new report from Richard's office explaining the justice system in Afghanistan. We call it, so many, and also I call it, is the Taliban formal justice system, because it's not meeting a formal justice system. And they eliminated so many of the important laws that have been developed over the 20 years. For example, the Constitution, or the Penal Code, or the Law on Elimination of Violence Against Women. And they abolished the Independent Human Rights Commission and Ministry of Women Affairs, and they replaced it with Ministry of PVPP, which now this ministry, the whole ministry is responsible to implement a very discriminatory law of PVPP that is passed last July. So inside of the country, women cannot seek justice for the violation of their rights. The state itself is the violator. So that's why after the takeover, Open Society Foundation and specifically Open Society Justice Initiative inside of Open Society Foundations, the lawyers is starting looking how they can support the women in Afghanistan. So this CEDA came to their mind because the whole, the violation of CEDA is very obvious in the case of Afghanistan. And besides their support and their efforts, Afghan human rights defenders, civil society, they also pushing for this case to go forward, because we're seeing that's one of the important outside accountability possible for Afghans inside of Afghanistan. So it's as Farishta mentioned, last year, September, 4 countries, they announced their intention for this potential case. We're still calling it potential because it's still in the court. And before going to the court, there are so many steps to take, and it may take longer for us to see the results. But that's why it's important for us that we are here listening and pushing for advocacy for this case. These states, they were pushed from the lawyers of Open Society Foundation and also Afghan human rights community to bring this case. So it's not ideal to have 4 Western countries, but that's why we want more states from the global south, from the Muslim majority countries to come forward to support it, because this is exactly violating all of the rights in their countries, in their terms of understanding about rights of women, and also it's not happening in any Muslim country around the world. Afghanistan is the only country that doesn't allow girls to go to school and universities. Women cannot go to work. So that's why it's important Muslim majority countries and other countries of global south come forward and support this case. So what is the stance right now, or status? So they announced the case last year September, and we had a consultation, Germany and other 4 states. Germany, Canada, the Netherlands, and also Australia. They started consultations with the Afghan civil society, so to hear their concerns about this case. And they conducted one in-person consultation in Germany. In that, we, as an Afghan human rights community, we also shared our concerns with them. For example, is it helping the legitimacy of the Taliban? Because when the case goes to the court, then someone should be representing Afghanistan. So all of these concerns have been shared with the states. You know, these are the things we, as a human rights community, we want you to take care in your account, because this is important for us. We don't want to, you know, to somehow legitimize the Taliban. But thankfully, this is not the case about Afghanistan. It's we don't need a legitimate to legitimize Taliban to go forward with this case. There were cases in the past, like the Myanmar versus it's going to be that there wasn't any legitimized government, but the case went to the court. So in the case of Afghanistan, we don't need the Taliban to be legitimized, and it's bringing so much. If the case goes to the court after the some other steps before that, like sending a diplomatic note, the country is sending the diplomatic note to the Taliban, and then trying to negotiate with them in a good faith. And negotiating is, I know it has a negative connotation for Afghans because of the past experience of failed negotiation in Afghanistan, but this negotiation is only about CETA. It's not about political recognition, about nothing about other things. It's just about the CETA and the violations of the Taliban for the articles of CETA. And it's very, you know, I think it's very positive for us that Afghanistan signed CETA in 2003 without any reservation, which, you know, now giving us the opportunity to bring this case. Otherwise, you know, like there were some countries, they had reservation, they didn't accept the ICG jurisdictions, which stopped, you know, intervention of the court. But in the case of Afghanistan, we don't have a reservation. So they sending the diplomatic note to the Taliban, and then they try to negotiate. If they cannot resolve their you know, disagreements on the violations of CETA, then there is a dispute, and So the dispute goes to the court. So why this? Very quickly, this case impacting actually the provision measures if the case goes to the court. The provision measures can you know, announce in a very short term, sometimes in 2 weeks. In the case of, for example, South Africa and Israel, it was 28 days. So it's quick, and it can rule the country to stop the violating of women's rights, and it's impacting women to get, you know, asylum in other countries. It's going. The result goes to the UN Security Council, and then bringing more attention to the situation of women and girls in Afghanistan, and actually somehow impacting on the legitimizing of the Taliban as well. So it's a very important case. As any of you in a position to advocate, to support this case, I would, you know, just kindly asking to do it. And if you need more information on this case, we have frequent ask questions that we develop with Open Society Foundations. It's available online, and people can also reach out to us if they have any question, if we can provide more briefing, and yeah, just giving more information. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fatima John, for all the information that you shared with us. My next question and my last question is for Richard. Richard, you have described the systematic rights violations based on gender in Afghanistan as a mounting crime against humanity, including gender persecution, and have called for states to consider codifying gender apartheid as a crime against humanity under the international law, and to support potential case at the International Court of Justice. What actions should the state prioritize at this moment to support holding perpetrators accountable? Over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Artemis, and especially for your excellent moderation. And thank you to the organizers of this event. I think it's really encouraging that the situation in Afghanistan is getting some good attention from the Human Rights Council in the early days of the 59th session. There are so many catastrophes in the world that it's important to remind everyone that we need to think about catastrophes that are several years old and ongoing. Thank you for that. I don't want to repeat too much what others have said. And you've also heard from me in council yesterday and in some side events already. So maybe what I'll try to do is comment a little bit on what each of the previous speakers have said, if that's okay with you, within the frame that you've asked. And in terms of Banafsha Jan's presentation, and Banafsha is really very clear about intersectionality, using the example of people with disabilities, but broadening from that. And if you looked at my report for this session, it's not only on women and girls' access to justice and protection, it's also on intersectionality. There's an annex on intersectionality, and this issue, this digging into the multiple layers of discrimination, exclusion, and segregation, and oppression, is something that requires more attention. Fareshta noted, and what I heard was the word tip of the iceberg at one point. And I am also of this view. Despite the reports from many, including myself and Human Rights Watch and others, I feel we're only scratching the surface. For reasons that Fareshta already set out, that people in Afghanistan are discouraged from, threatened if they report. Nevertheless, daily, my team and I receive reports from brave Afghans inside Afghanistan who have suffered serious human rights violations. And this, I think, is the tip of an iceberg. And these are, as Fareshta said, torture, arbitrary detention, extrajudicial killings, sexual violence. We do need more, and it is not easy to document and monitor human rights, especially when access to information has been shut down a great deal. And then with regard to we focused quite a lot on the CEDAW case, and I will support you in encouraging especially Muslim majority countries to sign up, not necessarily to be the litigants, because I think there's complications with adding litigants, but at least to signing the political declaration. As far as I'm aware, four members of the OIC have signed up so far. It would be great to see that number grow. And the second point that I want to touch on is about the risk of such a case adding to recognition. And I will say that I am for holding the de facto authorities to account. I don't think that's a form of recognition. And I do engage still. You mentioned negotiation, and that there are some people a bit nervous around that. I engage with the de facto authorities. They may not engage back, but I want to let you know that every time I write a report, before I start my research or during the research, I write to them and I ask them to make submissions. And sometimes I send them questions. Then, when I've finished a draft, I share the draft with them and ask for their comments. Recently, they've chosen not to do that. But that's not because I'm not keeping up my side of the bargain. I am open to hearing from them. So I think dialogue about human rights isn't isn't recognition or normalization either, but other things are normalization. And I just want to add another point about connecting what I've called a catastrophe in Afghanistan for women and girls to the global rollback on gender issues, which we witness here in this council and around the world. I won't go through a lot of other issues due to time that I had actually prepared. I'm happy to take questions. But perhaps, since the question was about what can international community do, it is to sustain principled international pressure, including the establishment of clear human rights benchmarks for engagement with the Taliban, and making it clear there'll be no normalization of the de facto authorities unless and until there are demonstrable improvements in human rights, particularly for women and girls. To strengthen support for civil society, in particular increased funding for Afghan-led organizations inside Afghanistan. To fully fund the humanitarian response for Afghanistan. To expand education and employment opportunities for women and girls in Afghanistan. And I think it was Fareshta who also mentioned, and I'll endorse that too, to support countries to receive and host Afghan refugees, and to center the rights, voices, and agency of women, girls, and Afghans in all their diversity in accountability and decision-making processes. And if we're truly to ensure accountability for violations and crimes in Afghanistan, and to respond to Afghan survivors' needs, we must respond to their wider demands for justice and for dignity. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard, for all the information that you shared with us. So now I want to open the floor for questions and comments. Please raise your hand if you have any questions or comments, and please also briefly introduce yourself. I can see a hand here, and then there, and there. So, over to you.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Abdullah Ahmadi, Director of Afghanistan Democracy and Organization. My question is regarding to referring of case of Afghanistan to ICJ, because we explained and Richard as well, but it still is not very clear that how it's not help them to recognize, because in the ICJ, the complaint refer is against a state, against another state, but not like ICC, that individual to complain against individual person. Without the recognition of the Taliban as a state, how it's possible to bring them to the court? Still, it's not clear enough for me. If you more explain, because is the de facto is we can consider as a state, or if they didn't accept as a like definition of a state, how we should bring them that they are not accept other like international law. But in the other case, it's different. Like when we are talking the Human Rights Council, or we are talking about the ICC, it's different because we different individual. Thank you.
We will take more questions and then we can start. So I can see. And maybe your mic is.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Artemis Akbary, members of Women Forum on Afghanistan, and also an independent research fellow. The speakers talked about the importance of documentation as a prerequisite for any future accountability mechanism. And we also heard immense challenges about documentation in the country with the collapse of civil society. And she also mentioned about how it has gone worse by now. I want to understand, especially with Human Rights Watch and also with Richard's office, have there been any targeted strategies to ensure that there are strategies built or learn how to document to target for targeted communities? By this I mean 4 years on, I think it has been long enough for us to come up with how to navigate these constraints on the ground in documentation, considering the constraints, because I think that as a prerequisite, that's something that we hear about, but we don't see any particular mechanism for it. Thank you.
that subsidiary protection is guaranteed for base gender violation, but not status of refugees. Also, if the European Court of Justice has recognized it, that they have to give and recognize this refugee status. In a lot of countries, they continue to don't recognize it and to give only subsidiary protection that guarantee fewer rights. So I think that lawyers and human rights defenders has to fight for it. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. My question is again in line with what Farhunda addressed on the documentation. First, I think when we speak of the other event was titled the right accountability mechanism, or how to track accountability. I think there has been a lot of focus since after 2021 and a bit, the period before that, sort of on the scope of the accountability timeframe. There has been a lot of efforts before the collapse of the government as well. The government of Afghanistan, and I think it might somehow relate to the authorities and our friends from the mission as well. They could address this. There has been a lot of spontaneous reactive accountability committees and mechanisms established. For example, when there were certain events happening, the government's response was, well, we establish a committee and mechanisms and they investigate. And after, we never hear what happened. Nothing, basically. Next to that, we have UNAMA, for example. And civil society's engagement with the OHCHR was that when there was efforts on stock taking on accountability, reportedly that UNAMA, and of course it's obvious that they are documenting a lot of cases. So how can we coordinate these different efforts on accountability that is inclusive, time-wise, but also like thematic across Afghanistan because of other issues of accessibility. For example, the special rapporteur does not have access. Civil society, they are in a really difficult condition to do that. So coordination basically, but also the scope would be my two things to get answered. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I can take one more question if there is another question. Okay. So we have 3 questions and 1 comment about documentation, how to coordinate the accountability efforts, and there was also a question about targeted strategy and also how to bring the Taliban to the ICJ without recognizing them as the government. So maybe most of the questions were for Richard, maybe, and then maybe we can start with Richard. But I want to give each
I
panelist.
wondered whether Fatima, there was the first question from Abdullah about the ICJ, and actually Fatima talked more than I did about that, so maybe she could start and then I'll follow up. Is that okay?
Thank you. So the concern about legitimization or recognition, it's a state to a state. A state of Afghanistan as a country is responsible for CEDAW because they sign and they have obligation to that. And the other countries, based on based on the Article 29, they can bring other states who are not doing their responsibilities for the signed treaty to the court. And they don't need a recognition. We had cases in the past, like I mentioned earlier, Gambia versus Myanmar. Myanmar didn't have a government. There was a military junta in that time. So they brought that country of Myanmar, but de facto authority of junta. And we had a United States case against Iran in 1980. Again, in that time, the Islamic Republic of Iran was not a recognized government. So we had cases like this, and the court accepted to bring cases of country against country without legitimizing a de facto authority of that country. And actually, this case, because it brings the more attention and attention to the situation of women and girls in Afghanistan, bring negative impact for the Taliban. And so many of the countries, if this case goes forward, so many of these countries will be hesitant to making more connection with the Taliban, or easily trade, or easily even open the pathway for recognition.
Yeah.
If I answered your
Yeah,
question.
just technically, because I know.
Yeah, thank you.
So, may I go now? So I'll just add on very, very quickly to that. One point is that all the states that have commenced this dispute with the state of Afghanistan have noted in the document where they've done that this in no way suggests that they are recognizing the de facto authorities. But we are living with what I would call some strategic ambiguity in this space, because on one hand, the Taliban are not sitting here, right, in Geneva or in New York. And they want to. And on the other hand, we are saying that because they control the territory, they're declared de facto authorities by the UN system, and therefore they have inherited the responsibilities of the state. And so there's a little bit of ambiguity in those two issues that I think we are just, it's unusual, but we are forced to live with it, because the alternative is to ignore them altogether and not to hold their feet to the fire. So I think we need to continue discussing that. On the question, if I may move on, that Fakunda asked, targeted strategies on documentation. I think it depends what you mean about documentation. There's human rights documentation, and then there's investigation and evidence gathering to a criminal standard. And only the ICC has been doing that so far, strategically, in Afghanistan. My mandate it includes a mandate to document and preserve information about human rights violations in Afghanistan, and I do that. I take testimonies in detail, as well as kind of generally monitoring the situation. But I'm restricted by a lack of resources that I've referred to several times, caused largely by the UN's liquidity crisis. I think, I want to emphasize that this is a really serious financial problem in the UN. There is no more recruitment right now. And I have 30% of what the Human Rights Council voted last year and was endorsed in the General Assembly. So the potential of my mandate hasn't been fulfilled. And I use this moment to thank my incredibly dedicated and skilled but very small team for working extremely hard to do our best to fulfill the mandate. But like I said to the council yesterday, it's getting to the stage where we can barely manage it. And then, and so there's a strategy to that extent. And the council has, I don't complain about the Human Rights Council, actually, because they have given me the mandate and they voted the resources. But it is partly member states within the UN system that haven't paid the bills. Possibly the UN system has become a bit bloated as well and not as efficient as it should be. So I think these two things have all come together to create a financial crisis. And then I think we're pretty much out of time. Maybe I'll just have a quick word supporting, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, who asked the question about referring on to asylum seekers in Europe and European Court of Justice decision to grant all women, all Afghan women who find themselves in a European state asylum without having to go through a process, and that you're quite right, we need to fight for that. Some countries have, aside from the ECJ decision, made this their policy, but there are very few pathways to reach those countries. I think we're all aware, probably in this room, that the situation of immigration globally, including but not exclusively Afghans, is getting extremely difficult, more and more difficult. It deserves more attention. getting already. Thank you.
First, John or Dr. Yakubu, do you want to add anything?
Sure.
Any final remarks? You have 2 minutes.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Very quickly on the question that Farhad John and Habis asked about this strategies around documentation. I think, I mean, there is a coordination within the civil society. The civil society has a coalition that they're working together, and I think this is part of their strategy that at some point they felt the need for a UN independent investigative mechanism for Afghanistan, because that sort of documentation, no one can do it. Like Human Rights Watch doesn't have that mandate. I mean, the Special Rapporteur Richard has also mentioned that he has the mandate to document and preserve information, not evidence. So in that sense, well, this is part of the bigger civil society strategy, a coalition of 90 organizations, including 70 plus of local organizations from Afghanistan, supported by 12 international organizations. This is the call that they have been calling, because there's a gap there, and that's something that no one else can fill that. So that level of documentation can only happen through an independent mechanism, which would complement the Special Rapporteur's mandate for Afghanistan. So I mean, that is the sort of things that they're calling for, and I'm hoping that the Human Rights Council and the member states in the room are also picking up on that, and they're hearing, because for the ongoing ICC case, for the ongoing, CEDAW initiative, as Fatima mentioned, we need evidence, basically. We need to have evidence that there is a need for documentation. No one is documenting the violations in Afghanistan up to a standard right now that could be used in a court of law. So, and it is, and I mean, again, I don't want to repeat myself, but in similar situations, this council have given these, have established similar mandates for similar situations. So we believe that Afghanistan needs one, and that's a huge gap for Afghanistan.
Thank you so much, First John. Dr. Yakubu, do you have any final remarks?
So just I want to add some recommendation, short, mid, and long term. For the short term recommendation, I'm just trying to ask all member states that if there is any initiative, any peacemaking, peace building program, we shouldn't forget people of Afghanistan, specifically those who are inside or outside the country, youth generation, and women and girls are more vulnerable groups that people unfortunately haven't been heard a lot. And to support Fresh Agent's recommendation regarding mechanisms which other organizations, civil society, they ask, I have one point here. I'm trying to say, so since we do not have any like these kind of established mechanisms still, so lots of people of Afghanistan, based on the complication we have in Afghanistan society, they haven't been heard. Still, there is lots of things that we need to know regarding that country, and we need to document them. There is lots of victims. There is lots of people who cannot reach, or people cannot reach even to Mr. Bennett to speak regarding their human rights issue. So, two things: we need more support from other member states for SR office, and then we really need that mechanism to help us. And last but not least, while we are sending the humanitarian assistance still at this time to Afghanistan, we need to care about how inclusive are these humanitarian aids, because most of people who are more vulnerable, unfortunately, they can't achieve and they can't reach to them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all our speakers for your powerful insights, and thanks to everyone in the room for your presence and engagement. What we've heard today makes clear that the situation in Afghanistan demands urgent and sustained international attention, not only to document and condemn these crimes, but to act. Gender persecution, gender apartheid, and targeting of LGBTIQ people and people with disabilities are not abstract concerns, but they are daily realities that requires accountability and justice. Afghan civil society, particularly women, LGBTIQ people, and people with disabilities, must be at the center of any future discussion in Afghanistan. Thank you so much for being here today.